So welcome everyone. Sorry for this little bit of a hectic start. Live and learn. It's only been 2 years of the pandemic. We should have it down yet. So this is our sort of maiden voyage of Ask the Certifiers and looking at issues, trying to make certification more accessible, the certifiers more accessible, sort of demystify things, get answers, hopefully, to all your questions. And if not, we can certainly come back and hopefully we'll learn a lot ourselves and see where there are gaps in information that we can provide and get that out to you to make things more seamless and user-friendly for everybody. One of the great things is that the certification community and the Passive House community is a global one, and everybody working cooperatively together. So this we like to see as an extension of that. So without further ado, I'm going to hand this off to Tad and Steve, who could introduce themselves. Perhaps I'm going to flip through the slides as you request. And if everyone, please feel free to type questions into the chat. We did get a few beforehand. And if you would like to raise your hand once we come back from this initial presentation, feel free. We'll figure it out as we go. All right, take it away, Tad.
Ken, thanks for setting this up. And it's wonderful that people want to learn more about this process. I want you to know that all these slides will be available. There's some links in them, so you don't have to take screenshots or notes. Let's go up to the criteria slide. So where we always start this process really is to look at the Passive House Institute's criteria, because this sets forth the 3 standards that we certify to: Passive House, Interfit, and the low energy building. And this is quite a detailed document. It's about 30 pages long. And what word of warning is that it's updated from time to time without notice. So if you're going to start a project that you want to certify, you want to go online to this link and make sure you've got the latest version. And the Passive House Network also has a website on the next slide, and it's a wealth of information. It has a lot of information, not only about Passive House itself, but the US community, the North American community, including a list of people. You'll see also more resources if you dial in a little bit deeper on the next slide to Passive House Institute's website. So you can always go to either one of these websites to get the information you need. And you can see from PHI's main page, you just go to certification of buildings, and then there's a drop-down menu with all the details. So the next slide will kind of set the context for us. And everyone knows that Passive House is a team effort, and that's the same thing with certification. I mean, a lot of people can ask, well, what is the certifier's role? We're a designer, a builder, or a developer. Our goal is Passive House. So what does the certifier add? Well, we support you with an independent review and feedback. PHPP is kind of a tricky tool to use, and most people want a second independent set of eyes to make sure the information they've entered is accurate and complete. But in addition to that, we will often provide information about tools, best practices, and the same things that we see, because most of us are doing 100% Passive House work. We may not be doing 100% of our work certifying buildings, because most of us also consult and teach, but we all have an active hand in the Passive House community. The next slide shows you what you actually get. You get proof that you've quality and you've achieved Passive House performance. You always get a certificate, which is shown on the left, and you have the option of purchasing a plaque that you can mount on the building. In addition to that, the next slide shows you that you get publicity and participation in the global movement. So one of our members is Matt Bowers. He's in Rochester, and we sorted the Passive House building directory by New York, and you see his house in the middle. You dial in and click on his house, and you'll see pictures, But most importantly, this is a new feature of the directory. You can see circled links to an article that's a case study. PHI calls them project documentation, but they're really about 25 to 30-page case studies that will tell you everything you need to know to learn about the passive house aspects of that building. In addition, many people post videos. So who are the certifiers? The next slide will kind of trace that for you. I heavily recommend going to the network's website first here, because these are the certifiers that are most active in the United States and Canada. You'll see many of us are located in North America, but there's also a number of certifiers in Europe that actively certify in North America. But if you want the full list of over 100 certifiers that the Passive House Institute has trained and accredited, you go to their website, you can sort it by country or alphabetically, and you'll see this huge list of people. And of course, the Passive House Institute itself is always available to certify your building. Now you'll see way over on the left mention of the North American Certifier Circle. What is that? It's basically just a group of us that's actively certifying in North America that come together on an informal basis to kind of try to advance the industry and to make sure that there's some coherence when we have questions that are not clearly answered by the criteria. It's a loosely affiliated group working through the network. So what's our process? How do we do this? Well, the next slide will show you that it's really flexible. It depends entirely on your needs and your wishes. And of course, things often change. Ultimately, you can have a two-phase process where we review your PHPP and your plans before you start construction. And that's what we recommend, this design stage review. And if you participate in that, we'll write a letter, which most of us call design stage assurance letter. I like to call it a design stage conditional assurance letter. And it basically just says, if you build it according to the plans and PHPP that you've submitted and we've reviewed, and you meet the requirements for airtightness and ventilation, and you document everything, then we will certify it when construction is complete. Over on the right, you'll see a very short list, because some people change their mind during construction. It's only after they've completed the building or they're well into construction that they decide they want to certify. So we can start certification process after construction has been completed. In fact, we can start years later, assuming there's adequate photo documentation and test reports. So again, you can do two stages, get a conditional assurance letter before you start construction, and then complete the process when you finish with the construction, or you can start it just after you've finished construction. Again, we recommend the two stages. The documentation at the end is mandatory. This list of 6 items is essentially what is always going to be required. This is for the Marshall Fire Program. We could certify just based on these last 5. You wouldn't need absolutely conditional assurance letter, although we, again, highly recommend it. And how do we do this? The next slide shows you that we have a marvelous tool that PHI created several years ago. It's called the platform, and it's free. It's online. Your certifier will set up an account for your building, and it's interactive. You can upload documents, you can post comments, and you can see that there's a drop down for each one of these 9 points, and you upload your documentation, your test reports, your plans, the PHPP, and the certifier will check them. If they're appropriate, correct, you'll get a green check. If something you haven't addressed or needs work, it's red. And there's a progress bar. When you get across all the way to 100%, then we ask PHI for a unique alphanumeric identifier for your building, and that's what we put on your certificate. What's important about PHI's program is that we have Interfit. The next slide shows you that Interfit also has flexibility. There are 2 options. So the first option is on the left, and that mirrors the Passive House standard. Those are absolute limits on heating and cooling energy based on the climate that the retrofitted building is in. But there's also this prescriptive path, and Passive House Institute calls it the component method. And essentially, this is the performance that you need to bring your envelope, including your windows and your ventilation system to And you can see it's all based on climate. And the next slide shows you roughly where those climates break out. Now, a word to the wise, these are just approximations. You have to get into the PHPP and click your location before you know exactly what climate will apply. So most people by this point say, what's it cost? Well, to my knowledge, no one is posting set prices. When we started Certifiers, we did that for a while, but what we found is that we really needed to make a custom proposal in every case. As you can see in this letter that I've marked up, it can be a fairly low price. This is a building I'm certifying for $1,800. That's the full price. And with everything that's done in Passive House Institute's program, no rater is needed. We rely on photo documentation and test reports demonstrating airtightness and ventilation system are performing to the requirements. So you don't have to figure, well, this is the price plus the price of the rater. This will be your price for getting a certificate. And you will not have to hire a rater, but someone will have to provide that documentation and those test reports. This is a bit misleading in that the actual price that you probably get is more like 2,000 to 4,000, maybe even higher. We've certified single family homes that were large and complicated and charged 14,000. So it really varies depending on the complexity and also, quite frankly, on the ability of the certifiers team. If the builder doesn't want to provide documentation, if the consultant doesn't want to provide the information that we need quickly and accurately, then we count on having to spend much more time. This proposal that I made is for a person who works for Andrew Peel. I've seen the PHPP already. It's flawless. I know that I'm going to be able to race through this, and it's quite frankly a very simple two-story box, a very small house. So that's why this price is so low. So all in all, your price is going to reflect two things: the complexity of the building, but also your level of expertise and your level of experience. But ideally, we can bring that level of experience and expertise to a high level so that you can get a low price, but it is ultimately within your control. One of the first places to go to get your level of expertise to the highest point is PHI's building certification guide. They published this about 3 or 4 years ago. It's an excellent document. It's about 100 pages long, but importantly, includes sample documents so you know what we expect in the process. And the next slide shows you a number of other tools. This is PHI's tool page. You can find this page from its main page. There's a number of free tools here that will help you on specific issues. Here's a resource from Andrew Peel. The next slide shows more resources. Some of the certifiers in the UK, like Peter Worm and the Passive House Academy, have created some really wonderful documents that help you with some of the tricky questions, like, what do I do with thermal bridges? Or, what do you expect to see in every page of the PHPP and the documentation? And there's links to those pages. And of course, there's always Passipedia. And then final slide, more resources. PHPP Illustrated. I tell everyone who comes to us that if you don't have a copy of this, you really should, because it's an illustrated guide. It's got sample pages from the PHPP. It's a wonderful resource. And also Emma Walshaw's First in Architecture. It's a really wonderful introduction to thermal bridge modeling, and includes psi values for, I think, about 90 details. And I think there might be some more tools on the following slide. Yeah, this is the Passive House details. If you're new to Passive House as a designer or builder, you'll want to get a copy of this. It's got really well illustrated details. And here's a free thermal bridge guide put out by Open Technologies, and the link to it. It's a Canadian document, but it's very helpful for evaluating thermal bridges. So I think, Steve, you might say a few words now, and then we can take some questions.
Just a couple of words about the process, I'd say. Um, we generally don't do a design stage assurance letter, but other than that, pretty much everything we do is what Tad's describing. Almost all of our projects are two-phase projects, and we strongly encourage people to get a certifier on board at schematic design stage. If for nothing else to have, there should be a consultant or designer involved at that point. But if you have a certifier involved, there's just another set of very experienced eyes to look at things and avoid issues early on. So that by the time you actually have construction documents with the guidance of a good consultant and a certifier, you should be all ready to go. And if the building is built according to the plans and the PHPP, then certification should be very easy. And it should be pretty inexpensive. We're talking single family, of course, which is the focus of this presentation. Totally depends on the complexity of the house and the quality of the supporting documentation. And the one player that I find I interact with quite a bit, other than the consultant or the designer, is the architect. Not that there are architects that know a bit about passive house, but a lot of them have never actually designed one and gotten it to completion. So they often have lots of questions. I particularly like the Passive House Details book that's on the slide there, because it's done in such a way that architects can read it and understand it and incorporate it into their details. So it's a very educational resource for them. And I also find that we do spend a fair amount of our time just doing education in the course of doing a certification. Okay, so again, there are lots of people that want to do passive houses, but it's their first time, or it's new, or they've just heard it's there and it sounds really cool and they want to know more. And so I probably spend 30% of my time just explaining things to people, mentoring, tutoring, walking them through various aspects, having conversations about thermal bridges, things of this sort. So it's not just a cut and dried, send me your documentation. We'll see if it's going to work or not. It's a team sport, like Tad said, absolutely positively, at its best. It's not always a team sport, but if it's going to work well, it's going to be a team sport. And everybody needs to be on board and motivated. And when that happens, it can be very smooth and relatively inexpensive too. And it's a lot of fun to do, I'll have to say that. Yeah.
Great. So I'm going to stop sharing. And I don't know, it looks like everybody came in with their video off. I don't know if people can turn them on or want to. There may be something with the settings, I fear.
While you're doing, Ken, while you're doing that, we can answer the question that Frank Crawford posted.
Yes. Yeah. So Frank, you had sent some questions ahead. So why don't we tackle those to get started and then see how we want to meander through this.
So Frank sent a question asking if we can certify a building, or if we have certified a building where air is recirculated through the HRV or ERV. And I think, Frank, you're in Alberta, so you're in a cold climate. Neither Steve nor I have experience with that. I would say the closest we have is I'm certifying buildings using the Yablatron, which basically achieves that by alternating the flow through the core. But you could perhaps explain a little bit more what you mean about that, if you've got audio control.
Yeah, so I guess the question is, have you ever certified anything without using a Zender? Like there's Life Breath, there's Vannies, there's Venmars. There's a number of other things that use recirculation of air instead of preheating. So I'm in a very cold climate, so my preheating energy, when I put it into PHPP, I live in a passive house, or designed it, it's uncertified. the Zender uses like 500 kilowatts, I think, a year, and the preheater uses like 1 megawatt a year. So preheating is pretty important in colder climates. So I'm just wondering if PHEI will allow you to use recirculation instead of preheat, or you have to use non-recirculation and basically a Zender unit.
Yeah, I honestly would have to see the ventilation system, because PHI has something of a prohibition on recirculating air. We had a building that I was going to certify where it was in Southeast BC in Cranbrook. And if I remember right, they wanted to recirculate the air because they were going to send it through the fan coil to mix fan coil warmed air with air coming through the ERV. And ultimately, I think we got permission. What I've done, I've certified at least one building. I think we've certified 2 total where they use ground loops and glycol as a preheater, which seem to have a lower energy draw than the electric coil.
And my projects are 100% Zender. I'm south of the Canadian-US border, and that just seems to work everywhere, and everybody's very happy with that. So I have no experience with that kind of equipment.
Okay. I would say, Frank, that you should know that you don't have to have a Zender. So what's come up mainly, and you addressed it in your second question, is what about certifying with a Minotaur or a Build Equinox Serve? So the short answer is yes, you could certify with those. And people are building buildings that I believe will be getting certified. The problem is that PHI did a study of both of those equipment, that type of what they call an active heat pump ventilator. And they found that since it has no passive heat recovery, or in summer, no passive heat rejection, you end up entering 0 in that part of the ventilation sheet. And so you typically have a difficult time meeting the heating demand limit. However, PHI itself explained that depending on the climate and the building, that might be an adequate strategy. For instance, in apartments that are small and have a fairly high occupant density, so they've got good internal heat gains and they have low envelope losses, they may be able to succeed with 0 passive heat recovery or heat rejection in summer. And it's a nice compact unit. And they also said definitely in moderate climates, mild climates, it would be an acceptable strategy. So there's no, Zender doesn't have a lock on the market. And like I said, Yablaton is entering the market. And we're seeing other equipment. There's a company in Italy called Epoca that's trying to bring into the North American market a combination of a heat pump that does most of the ventilation, like the Minotaur and Serve, but it also has a passive counterflow core built into it, so it can run just with the core heat recovery. So,
yeah, and that's an interesting unit. And the other thing too is that if you have unusual mechanical systems or equipment or aspects of the building that don't fit the normal PHPP mold or the certification standard approach to things, sit down, talk to your certifier, get details, and your certifier can have a conversation with PHI and say, okay, well, we have this unusual situation. How are we supposed to deal with it? How do we treat it? And give us some guidance. And PHI does that on a regular basis. There's always unusual things that come up, and this is part of what they do for us as certifiers, and you as somebody who wants to get a building certified. So
yeah, I'd reinforce that if I could, just that as part of the process when you're starting out, to identify anything that could be potentially a special, quote unquote, and to get out in front of those rather than bringing it up late in the innings, which can throw a real wrench if it doesn't break your way. So yeah, you want to be totally transparent and upfront about the tricky stuff, and have time to work it out.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Frank had one final question. I think you said, is there a free library of thermal bridge calculations for typical North American residential wall assemblies. Not yet. So the open link that you saw actually was based on the Morrison Hirschfield for commercial buildings. So if you look through it, you'll see a lot of the heavy construction, a lot of steel stud framing, but they've started adding more passive house performance level assemblies. So if you scroll down far enough, you'll see wood framing. They don't have that many details yet. And the warning is, I'm not sure that they used the same conventions that PHI uses, but at least that's their goal, is to have something, and it is absolutely free. In addition, one source that can be helpful is if you're using PHI certified windows and you're installing them in a wall that shows up in PHI's Windows certificate, that's a good basic value to start with, right? And it might be used for estimation purposes. And if it's conservative, in other words, if your detail's even better, then it could be that your certifier would allow you to use that as a value for certification. And then that resource that Emma Walshaw, she's published, you can get that for about 120 Canadian, but it does have the psi values for 90 common thermal bridges, and there will be a North American version coming out.
So Andreas, who had his hand up, had to leave for something, unfortunately. But we have a question from Tim here. Has anyone experienced any problems certifying buildings using SIPs, structural insulated panels? How about when using magnesium oxide faced SIPs? Any experience with SIPs?
Go ahead, Tad.
Go ahead, Steve.
Oh, okay. All right. I've done an analysis of a SIP-based building as someone who, they hired me as a consultant, not as a certifier. Their intent was to certify. And it was a complicated building, and it was a weird SIP panel that I'd never seen before. It had like embedded concrete, and not just in between the sandwich of, you know, the foam layers, but it also had roof panels and all kinds of things that I'd never seen before. It was possible to get it to meet the criteria, okay, with some fiddling around, but I'm not even sure he ever built it. He kind of dropped off my radar after a point, and I think he might have just suspended the project. So it never made it to certification, but the analysis worked out okay.
Yeah, we haven't had a SIPs building yet, but we wouldn't have any per se objection to it. We've certified a number of buildings using panels. So one of the buildings that I certified up in Valemont, BC, which is definitely a cold climate, used Collective Carpentries panels. And we're on track to certify one using B Public's panels and Phoenix House's panels, their alpha system. So it's really nice when you use a certified system because all the thermal bridge values are established.
Yeah. And actually, I should mention one other thing that's literally in my backyard. I've got a 300 square foot ADU in the backyard that's on track to be low energy certified. And the roof structure is built out of SIPs. I just did that about 5 or 6 years ago, and I kind of forget all about it. It's just back there and there's somebody living there. But that's on track to be certified sometime later this year. So I guess I've got a little bit of experience with SIPs, not zips.
Great. We have a question from Vlad here about have you faced a situation where the window manufacturer is presenting you with a window performance certificate done by IFT Rosenheim Institute in Germany?
No.
So that's an independent testing body in Germany. They do all kinds of building related testing, right? What's the significance of that, Vlad? What would be the issue? Can you unmute?
Okay, I
There you
managed to unmute. So hello, yes, thanks.
Hi.
So I worked with a bunch of local window distributors of UPVC windows coming from Germany, like Vekas and Kommerlings and Trokals, and they're starting to sell them here. And they're wondering whether they can, use them in a certification. So I did some, U-frame analysis and all that for them. And they were not happy with my results. They're saying IFT Rosenheim is giving us lower values than you, and I've done mine by 10077 -2 standard. So I kind of ran around for a little bit trying to figure out what's the discrepancy, and finally got in touch with Ed Lowe's at PHI, and he said, well, and also there were papers by RDH on that saying that Rosenheim may be using a different method. They're using EN 12412, which is a hot box method, which is basically a physical method of measuring the window performance. And they get lower values that way. And they're kind of using this to sell their windows. But I had to, try to find a definitive answer. And fortunately, Ed Lowe's has provided me one saying like, we don't accept anything else other than 1077-2 for, window frame performance. So I don't know if you have faced those situations. I know that Ed May and John Mitchell have recently in New York, and John has contacted me actually asking me, what did I find out about that? So I was just wondering if you are having similar experiences over in your neck of the woods.
Not yet, but thanks for the heads up.
Might be coming.
It's only logical that everyone use the same testing boundary conditions and protocols.
Right.
So, but I think that's helpful. That might actually be something where the network could put out a little news flash. Just if you're curious, the U values have to be tested by this particular ISO standard, and that's published by PHI. So it should be clear to the people that are working in Germany where PHI is located, even if they don't like it.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, that's another good example of a special, right? Where you need to get out in front of it and make sure that the components are tested to the proper protocols to avoid any unnecessary pain along the way. And certainly one of the reasons why, as a shortcut, there's nothing better than using certified passive house components, where the quality assurance is baked in. It goes in the PHPP already, and can move things along.
That totally simplifies the process across the board, especially with Windows. In my projects, the Windows are the biggest pain usually, if they're not certified. And trying to get anything from the window manufacturers at times is like pulling teeth. And I reached the point where I'm almost insisting that my clients use PHI certified windows, or it's going to be really expensive, or I'm unable to help them, and I tell them to talk to Tad instead or something.
Is there a standard discount on the performance, or or you just can't put in numbers?
In what respect, Ken?
Just degrading the performance.
Degrading the performance?
Yeah, degrading it.
Yeah, no, the problem really is if they're not certified products, you have to get, you have to do what Vlad was describing. You have to do a U-frame analysis according to the proper protocols. You have to be able to confirm the glazing specifications from a reputable, documentable source. You have to do a SI install installation, which you might have to do anyway, and a glazing edge SI calculation too. So there's a lot of stuff you have to do that's mostly done for you when the window gets certified.
Exactly.
And just trying to get the details you need to do that analysis, whether it's consultants doing it or the certifier can't do it on a project they're certifying, but somebody with that level of skill has to be able to do that. And the biggest problem is if the window manufacturer has not gone through a window certification process, they don't really even understand what it is you're asking for. Or even if they do have a certified product, I found sometimes they don't know what you're asking for because you're probably talking to the wrong person. So just getting what you need in order to get over that hurdle can be difficult and problematic and really stressful and irritating.
Yeah.
Yes,
So
exactly.
Corinna mentions that there are references in the certification guide as well as the criteria itself. So it's important to use those resources as references.
Yes.
I'm curious, a question maybe to go the other way is, I'm assuming there are a number of people here that probably have not gone through the certification process at all, and are thinking about it. And I don't know if anybody would want to speak to, what's kind of going through your mind, like what are there bigger questions? It's easy for us to dive into the details of, you can never geek out too much with Passive House. So, but as somebody who's coming to the process, what's up or what's forward in your mind? Anybody want to jump forward? No obligation. Or maybe you've done one and you're thinking about like, what you would do differently, or, what you would like to see differently happen.
I guess my name's John. I'm curious, and Tad, we've talked before on the phone. It was really a pleasure.
Yeah.
I am curious. I guess one of my questions is basically it centers around the ENERFIT certification process, particularly the stepwise process, because I really feel, and I've felt ever since hearing about Passive House, I felt pretty passionate about retrofits getting being possible, being accessible, being something that, and so one of the things I've really thought a lot about, especially as I have considered my own house, and I know Ted, we talked a little bit about it, but is how does one proceed, especially if one has certain goals towards the beginning of a project, but you might want to take all those right steps towards certification, even maybe incorporating somebody into the process like a certifier, but you're not necessarily sure if it's going to end up being certified, or maybe if it's going to be you owning the home at the time that it'll be certified. So maybe somebody, you're going to pass the house on to another person and you're going to kind of split the bill. It was an idea that I had. So maybe somebody achieves part of it, and then you end up selling and you move, and then you're selling the house with the understanding that there's a step yet to be done. Basically, how can you proceed when it's a chunked process? What's the precedent for that? Is that a newer thing? Does that make sense to anyone?
Yeah.
Sure. I actually live in an uncertified ENERFIT house that stretched from when I started in August 2009 to just a few years ago. And I still have a couple of holes in the sheetrock that my wife has reminded me to, now that I don't have COVID as an excuse, I need to get them done. At the risk of speaking out of school, I think the stepwise program is unnecessarily complicated. Stepwise offers you to do some of the work and get a certificate on the premise that you're going to do the rest of the work and have a building that meets the ENERFIT standard someday, sometime in the future. But otherwise, I don't know that there's much to the stepwise approach. I think can sound and be too complicated. So you use common sense and to phase the work, but you could actually just talk to a certifier now, say, these are the things that we're going to do to this building. We don't have any idea when we'll be done. And then come back a few years later and have all your photos and your blower door test showing you're under 1.0 and your ventilation system commissioning report, And I think that you know, there's a fair amount of leniency built into the Interfit program, and hopefully it wouldn't matter who owns it, who's done the work, as long as it's documented. You know, that we can see there actually is insulation between those studs, and there is a layer of continuous insulation someplace. You know what you're saying, what you've drawn. Steve, I don't know if you have anything to add on that, but I will tell you that we have had 2 certifications drop out. One of them basically said they told the builder how to make the building airtight, that we had given them product advice, you know, for liquid applied air barriers, and the builder blew off the advice. The designer didn't catch it because they weren't out in the field that much, and they just failed the blower door test. And then we've also had a similar situation where the builder did not follow the instructions of the architect to put in insulation. So I guess Interfit is a type of building where it's easy for the contractor to go off on their own path, thinking, you know, what they think.
Yeah.
Yeah, in any case, the builder has to be on board.
Yeah, completely. And all of my work is essentially new construction, which includes also existing buildings that are gut remodels. But we treat them as new construction because almost everything except the framing is new. I agree with Tad that the Interfit process seems complicated. I've never done one. I'd rather not ever do one. But doing one the way you're describing it, John, where you're splitting it across 2 owners, to me, that seems like an order of magnitude more complication. I mean, you can get it certified after the first stage, you know, the Interfit. The first stage Interfit is the point at which you can submit your plan and your documentation to get certified. But what happens after that, I think, especially if a new owner steps in, is sort of like total conjecture.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I guess the nuts and bolts is kind of clear to me maybe after I hear about it now when you guys talk about it, which is basically that within the stepwise process, you can say if you proceed further along these steps, then this will be certified. And I think that's all I could ask for, especially when you know, again, I'm coming at it where it wouldn't be a gut, you know, we wouldn't be doing this, we would move out, it would be a complete, it's not feasible, you know, it would. Yeah. I'm trying to look at it from every possible angle to where we can achieve something as we go along, and even if it doesn't necessarily come to fruition, we're taking the right steps along the way. I know Tim Ian was saying he had some people he's worked with that they did the work themselves, and it took them over 10 years, and they actually didn't even know if they completed it yet. And I'm not saying that's going to be my goal from the beginning, but my point is that I believe in it enough to where I want it to be accessible, and I want to at least take steps along the way so that if I want to continue, then I can, instead of blocking myself out once I start taking the first couple steps. Wrong.
Yeah, it's totally doable. And I think, I mean, I would conjecture that the documentation is the key. You want to be able to document along the way and have those plans in place. And I'll just, in defense of Interfit, there's a lot of Interfit in the Northeast in particular. And the stepwise, even definitely, you know, not creating dead ends for yourself, I think is the big point, right? That you can get to the finish line. And we will at the conference have a couple of presentations on Interfit. One, scaling historic masonry retrofits Interfit, and one on a stepwise 20-story occupied residential tower in Canada that's finishing the third of 4 stages right now. So a different scale from single family homes, but that's a interesting beast. There's a question that came on the side regarding how can consultants minimize the risk of post-construction review questions from the Passive House Institute after a certifier has already reviewed and preconditionally cleared the plans for approval.
I can
So,
add, sorry, I can add some context if it helps, Tad.
Sure.
go ahead, Greg.
Yeah,
please.
sorry, I'd love to be on camera. I'm calling from a phone, so it's better for the data. But so I'm relatively new to this. I mean, I've been through the PHI certification process on 2 projects. I'm going through my 3rd. They're all multifamily, but in the first 2 projects that I've been through, both times, and I've had really good experience from our certifiers. It's been pre-certified. Everybody's on the same page. The project's done. Building's occupied, and then the PHI has started a new review almost, and they've asked questions that nobody asked earlier. And in my first case, embarrassingly, that resulted in us switching from a classic designation to a low energy, which really made both myself and the certifier kind of look bad. And it happened on a second project that I'm going through right now. And I'm just wondering if there's anything I could be doing differently or should be that kind of eliminates this kind of almost like post certification audit from happening.
Craig, that shouldn't happen. I've only been involved in 1 multifamily. We've got 2 other certifiers in our co-op that are doing another multifamily. And what we found on that multifamily is anytime there's any whiff of question, we're just referring that to PHI and saying, this is exactly our situation. And we're spelling it out in detail. And we're saying, we need a yes or no, not a what's the best way to do it. We just need a yes or no. Can we certify it this exact way? To avoid that, because unfortunately that has happened with other people besides yourself. Fortunately, the good news is I've never seen that happen on a single family building. Single family is pretty well dialed in, and the stakes are not as high, quite frankly, as a big multifamily building. But I regret to hear stories like that. I can assure you that that has been a big, huge part of what the NACC and the network and Passive House Canada have been working on with PHI. We're trying to resolve
that's good
that.
to hear. Yeah, and thanks for doing that. I really appreciate you guys fighting that fight for sure. And I'm happy to hear that single families got it dialed in, because I'm about to go through that again. But my strategy on this, I have a 3rd multifamily going through now. My strategy has been just what you said on that case. I actually have a specific document where anything that's controversial, I release as soon as we're starting design, and get the certifier to run it by PHI and get it in writing, the answers to each of them, so that I don't have that again.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I'm curious, Greg, could you give us a short description of an example of one of these things that just threw you off the rails?
I can, and it still really irks me every time I bring it up. So I won't mention any names or anything, but it was the wind protection coefficient.
Seriously?
On the ventilation tab. And I thought I fought a valiant fight. I even wrote a letter. I showed photos and everything, but they just felt like I need to model this building in an open field. And as you know, that variable has such a huge impact on the results. That's what did it.
Oh boy, that's really interesting. Thanks for sharing that.
And
no problem.
It's not like there's a precise scientific definition of any of those 3 conditions.
That was the problem. Yeah.
Okay.
But anyway, we had an understanding client that was okay with it in the end.
Good.
Well, Greg, I had the same thing actually on a single family house. Wonderful designer in Victoria, BC, with a family that was totally committed to Passive House. Beautiful little infill project, 2 stories above a full basement. And he knew that the occupancy was going to be higher than what PHPP was predicting. And he wanted to be as accurate as possible. So he put in his own occupancy that was higher, that generated higher internal heat gains. And they built the building with that. He easily could have bulked up the insulation just a bit here and there. He used low solar gain windows on the east and west side because he didn't want to have overheating. So he denied himself some winter heating, solar heating that he could have easily gotten just with using the same windows that they were using on the south side. And so then he came to us. I got very excited about the passive house, and late in the process, construction almost done, they came to us to certify. And I said, great, wonderful building, but we got to make some changes to the PHPP. We only certify the building based on the occupancy that the PHPP itself calculates. And he said, oh. I said, yeah, it's the rule. It's like anyone could occupy that building. So it just has to be PHPP using the occupancy calculator. And so that dropped the occupancy from what he expected was basically 5 people down to, I think, 3 or 3.1. And the internal heat gains dropped, and it became a low energy building. And it's like he was right at 13 or 14, and now it's at 16 or 17. The building's the same, and I say it's a passive house, but fortunately he was very graceful about it. The clients were graceful about it. It's a wonderful building, but
yeah, I think it points to a key distinction that sometimes is people don't appreciate enough, is that there's doing the calculations for the variance of life and different occupancies and weather, the climate, level of occupancy, and then there's what's required for certification, and the certification is just one set of data points. And if your ultimate use doesn't align with the certification, to have happy clients, you need to make sure that you're also calculating to those variables, which consultants and hopefully the certifiers are having those conversations. So you can kind of game out what the possibilities are.
Yeah, as a consultant, I stress test everything for future anticipated conditions. But yeah, you can certify doing that. Yeah, that's okay. At least it gives you more information, and you hopefully get insight into how the building will perform under those other circumstances. And maybe it's just fine, even though it's not certifiable, as a classic or a, whatever level you're going for.
Great. Another process question, then we'll go back to, I think, Frank's question if we have time on the air admittance valves. So someone who's a self-schooled passive house designer coming to certification is a bit overwhelmed and wanting to know where to start.
I would say start with the certification guide. Read that and understand what's involved. And it's a good, fairly concise snapshot of the whole process, including the documentation, the roles of the various players, things like that. Whenever I start a new project, I always send the certification guide to the client, to the architect, to the builder, and I hope that they all read it, and then we discuss. So I'd say if you just want one go-to resource, I would cite that as the best one. Tad, you might have a different choice.
The guide's wonderful. I think we're going to work with Ken to try to make some resources available. Pretty exciting side to all this is in Marshall, Colorado, where they had this devastating fire that reduced to rubble about 1,000 houses. The local utilities offering a big incentive, but it's causing us to be a little bit better on how we present certification. So we're going to hope to have some model documents out. So keep tuned with Ken and the network to see about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. I would also suggest, self-schooled is great, definitely, and PHI is a big proponent of getting your certification as a designer consultant through doing a building. I'm curious, and maybe Vlad, you could speak to it. We're the Certified Passive House Designer course is I believe a good way to get the language and the processes and the different interrelationships kind of more into the blood flow, so to speak, as preparation for doing building certification.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's almost a prerequisite. I mean, it's okay to educate yourself, here and there, maybe as you're pursuing your career, but to get to really a good foundation knowledge, I think you need to take a course. In my case, I was aiming to take a course and get certified through the exam, but due to COVID, it got postponed so many times that I just didn't want to wait anymore. And I was living in a house that was built to passive house standard, and I wanted to know, is it really a passive house or not? So I kind of embarked on this journey myself to try to see if I can certify it myself. And I went through this process of learning where the documentation is, what it entails, and what needs to be created, and who to certify with, and all of that. So it was another step, another learning experience that in the end has given me the certification as a CPHD. But I think the course is almost a must. I mean, you need to learn all the good stuff, and from the experts.
And there's a lot.
Yeah. And trying to put in a link to the site, which has other learning possibilities there.
I think the optimal situation is where you become a certified pass house designer by taking the course, but then you get a pass house certified, because it really cements and makes real everything that you learned in the course. And there's only a limited amount of teaching of PHPP in the designer course. So even if you have, and we highly recommend taking a PHPP course, getting a building certified will be essentially either a duplicate of that course or making that what was learned about PHPP concrete in a real building. So at that point, the nice thing is you can tell people I'm a CPHD or C, and I've gotten a building certified, and that has you kind of guaranteed both by passing the test and also by passing the certification test.
Did that answer?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Great.
One of the nice things that we do that isn't necessarily available in other building certification regimes is if you design a building and create the PHPP and then we certify it, you can win your professional certification that way. You can become a certified pass house designer by that. And I've had the good fortune of doing that twice. Both times they were people that had tested to become a certified pass house designer, but that status needs to be renewed every 5 years. And with COVID, one person had not been able to go to enough conferences to get continuing education credits. But I certified the building that he designed, and he got his certification renewed for another 5 years.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. Quick technical question, I think, from Frank Crawford on air admittance valves in single family homes getting PHI certification. Any feedback?
We're not allowed to use those in any place I work, so
Code wise,
we don't do, code wise, yes. And as far as certifying, installing them after occupancy is fine, but you certify the building as it's built, not as it's configured after it's finished. Okay. Although I suppose if you postpone the certification, I mean, I'm not quite sure why you would install them after occupancy, unless in our case it'd be to circumvent building code requirements. Okay.
That's the trick.
I can
Okay.
I have certified a building that after the building was inspected and got certificate of occupancy, then they went up on the roof and installed an air admittance valve. And they also went down in the basement and installed a flapper valve. Now, flapper valves typically are accepted by code officials, And they have a similar effect as a air admittance valve because they don't allow convection to pull air up through the building, cooling the building, and allowing the sewer gases to rise up through the building. Because when the water stops flowing, the flapper valve closes, so convection can't pull air from the soil up through the building. So I got confirmation from PHI that flapper valves would have essentially the same function, and they said fine. So they cut out the 1 foot section of the pipe to put in a coupler, and put in a flapper valve. And it was important in this particular building because they had an exterior rain drain that had to go through the basement. So they had to insulate the pipe, but to prevent the convection loss, the flapper valve had that purpose. And then they also did it on the sanitary sewer as well. But I have a house that's completely ventilated by air admittance valves, no through wall valves, and I'm a big proponent. And we used to see that we were told in Canada that you couldn't have them. And we certified a building where the engineer went to the local code official. She was open to new ideas. She was in a town that had a university, and she allowed them to use air admittance valves on a publicly owned building, which is a preschool, daycare building. And the large building that Ken was just talking about, that Enterfit, I think in Hamilton, Ontario, that is ventilated with air admittance valves. So even in Canada, which we had been told was the most restrictive environment for air admittance valves, they're being allowed. In some cases, the building officials are forcing people to put them on the roof, but they still function on the roof. It's just kind of a crazy workaround.
And the other thing too, Frank, on a single family home, I wouldn't think either the thermal bridge or the convection losses from, 1 or 2 vent stacks would be all that significant. What I've done in my houses is we combine all the vent stacks into one. And so we just have a single exit out of the building. And that helps a bit. But again, in terms of the impact, it shouldn't be that huge. Unless it's like a really, really tall single family building.
Well, we're cold here, so I'm working on a grant to try to get them accepted, and putting it through the PHPP stack spreadsheet. It's 2 gigajoules or 1.6 gigajoules of energy loss per year. So that's not nothing for 8 meters, which is kind of 2.5 stories, because it's all the way from the bottom all the way to the top. So it does add up. And that's why I was just asking you guys, because it seems to be about a kind of a 50-50 on whether or not the code official will accept it, and if not, you kind of cheat and put it on after occupancy.
Yeah,
well, Frank,
and it'll only help if you can get it to certify without them. It'll just be an improvement.
Frank, I'll send you some resources. I've been preaching air admittance valves to anyone who will listen. In our state, the largest manufacturer, Studer, through IPS, they actually sued the state of Oregon. And I worked with the lawyer that brought the suit and the IPS staff, and that's why we were able to get a 100% sewer gas ventilation with air admittance valves in our own house. But it's an uphill fight. Plumbers hate them like like the fashion.
Yep, that'll be great. I'll send you my contact info.
Yeah. Great. So we're good over time, a little bit over time here. I think it's probably a good place to wrap it up. I'd like to thank Tad and Steve and all of you for joining us today. Definitely, I learned a few things, and it's always interesting to see how different people are coming at it and what you're thinking about regarding it. And we look forward to kind of developing this format and building on it. So the idea is to have this be a resource and something that we can all make our lives a bit easier from.
And you have another session scheduled, Ken, don't you, in May?
There will be one in May. It is not on the calendar yet, but it'll be at about this time in May. I think the 3rd Tuesday or thereabouts. And we'll be the idea will be to focus on multifamily, and then we'll hopefully flip back to single family again. And out of the Marshall Fire in particular in Colorado, we're pushing hard to bring together a number of resources around single family homes in particular to help streamline the process there as folks are moving quickly to rebuild their homes. And we want to give them every opportunity to be able to hit passive house.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you all. Good to see you
Yes, thank you.
and
Yeah.
hear from everybody. Great
Okay.
questions and comments. We'll follow up. Have a good day.
Okay. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.